All right. Um, Welcome to the stream, everyone. Let's get started. That phrase brought back a little bit of my childhood. Um, uh, I would come home from school and watch Darkwing Duck with my with my brothers. So I'm like, let's get started. I'm like, let's get dangerous. Uh, so Good old Darkwing Duck. If you guys know who that is, you're probably as old as I am. I spent the whole day trying to fix the NX plus V test error, even in a brand new project. The error persisted. To fix it, I ended up pushing the project to GitHub and then cloning it as a new project. What terminal is that? Oh, that sounds like it sucks. I hope I don't run into that. But I'm not using VTest, so I'll have to check that out. Chandu, the terminal I'm using is Warp. Um, so this is left over from the um, talk I did for the meetup. We're looking at the stuff we finished with last week, where we got our heroes selectable and stuff like that. I think we're in the middle of making this look nice, but um, right now things look better than they did. So we're probably gonna leave it here and maybe clean it up later. Um, That is over. What is your terminal again? It's Warp. Sorry about the ads. I've tried to turn my ads down as much as I can. This is the longest tour of Heroes. Well, yeah, we want to make sure that we take the time to do it right, man. Come on. It's good to see you, Abra Lores. Um, the terminal is Warp. I was gonna pull that up. I I got invited to um I got invited to the preview, but I think it's available for everybody generally now. Yeah, you can just download it for Windows now. I really like Warp. At work, we're not able to use a lot of stuff that has AI built into it. So the terminal I use at work is Ghosty on my Mac, um, but on Windows, and the thing about the Warp terminal is it's got a lot of AI in it. Let me put this in the chat so you guys can go check it out if you want. I'm not sponsored by Warp or anything. It's just my favorite terminal. Um, so yeah, it is a Windows terminal. So the nice thing about Windows was in Windows 10 they moved away from the command shell to the Windows terminal, which has allowed some decent terminals to pop up. Warp is probably my favorite. Before Warp, I used a couple of different terminals, but I really like Warp. Warp allows you to set up like themes and stuff, and then I'm also using. Um, oh, why am I drawing a blank right now? Um, I'm using the power level 10K using the and that's gonna bug me. Um, it'll come to me in like 2 minutes. Um, but yeah, I was trying Cursor and my 2 week pro trial has ended in 1 week. Not sure I wanted to keep using it if they do like this. There was an interesting article I read recently talking about how all of the big AI companies are basically burning money. Um, I don't know how they're going to survive. Um, once once people stop dumping all of the investment dollars into them, I don't know how they'll survive. You've got Hugging Face doing some cool stuff. Like I really like the stuff that Hugging Face is doing. They even just released like a little robot which is AI driven, which is cool. Um, so if you guys aren't aware, Hugging Face is like if you go to huggingface.com, that's where you can download all the LLMs. Um, And if you've got the power to run it locally, you can run those LLMs locally. Hugging Face will also host LLMs for you. Featherless is probably Featherless AI is my favorite for running LLMs in the cloud. I don't run as many locally as I used to. And then so those are the things that I use. I'm not sponsored by any of them. Those are just the ones that I tend to use. Yep, startup life, baby. AI bubble, exactly. That's just the way it is, you guys. You know, people don't realize that the money's going to run out until it runs out. But Warp is a really cool terminal, and it uses AI to help with stuff, right? I don't have Warp Pro. With Warp Pro, I could do like more agentic type stuff. And one of the things I want to take a look at is potentially adding the Angular MCP to my terminal. But I want to dive into the Tour of Heroes a bit today. Assuming I don't get sniped, right? So we've got our list displaying. And they used an NG4. Of course, we didn't use NG4. And they used some LIs. We wound up cleaning this up a bit to suit our needs. And then, the styling the heroes. And I think we're at the details. So we need to set up the event to fire the details. Friday, I did the interview. And I think they want to make me an offer. I'm waiting for, dude, that's amazing. That is awesome. I really hope it goes well. Because that's amazing news. Could you give me some tips for starting a job that I'm really not qualified in? Wait, is that is that saying that every job I've selected I'm not qualified for? That may be an apt that may be an apt here's the thing. In your career, you're going to have to stretch to grow, right? It's that way with anything in life. And I recently started watching Black Clover with my daughter. And there's a character in Black Clover, Yami, who's like the leader of this group called the Black Bulls. The Black Bulls are kind of this group of misfits in the anime. And Yami's always saying that you have to reach your limits and push past them, right? And I really like that sentiment. Because the only way that you reach you reach higher levels in your career is to figure out what your limits are and then push past those limits, right? When you're not, if you're feeling not qualified for a job, that probably means that you're stretching yourself, which is a healthy thing to do. My suggestion is to go in and treat it like any other job, right? Go in and learn the ropes, and then you're just gonna have to work extra hard. Your first few weeks to even months of a new job, they don't expect you to be miraculous, right? They do expect you to understand what they're talking about and things like that. But if you go in and you work hard and you work extra hard and you make sure that you're you're exploring your limits and then figuring out how to push past them, you'll be fine. This is not really imposter syndrome. Those guys are very advanced stuff, and I'm not. This is not really not basic stuff like syntax or whatever. This is very advanced Golang, React, Kubernetes, job, etc. And yeah, I mean, I'm not even saying that this is imposter syndrome. I'm legit saying that everybody has their limits. And if you want to keep improving, you've got to discover what those limits are, and you've got to move past them, right? I'm sure they're doing very advanced stuff, which means you're going to spend a ton of time with AI asking, what does this code mean? And you're going to spend a ton of time in Golang and Kubernetes docs and things like that. And, you might want to look at setting up some agents in like Notebook LM and have those agents crawl the Kubernetes site and look on YouTube for Kubernetes videos and stuff like that, so that you can ask your notebook LM, right? Hey, they were talking about this. What do I need to do, right? And that's very cool. Like, that's very cool. I respect that. Their work is open source. It's nonprofit. That's very, very cool. I really hope that you do really well with this. Um, but that's my suggestion. Like, one of the very cool things we've got now is tools like Notebook LM and like an agentic workflow, right? Um, that kind of stuff is really important anymore. Um, because you can go and you can set up things in Notebook LM, and then you can. The crazy thing about Notebook LM is like, you could set it up and have your agents go search, I don't know, different websites. Like, say you're trying to learn Go, right? And have it search different websites. And then you can ask Notebook LM, hey, create me a podcast that I can listen to on the train that's going to teach me Go. Notebook LM will actually create callers into the podcast and create chat like interactions and all of this stuff. It's actually really cool, but it's a very interactive way for, when you're on the train, or when you're maybe, on breaks or whatever. You can listen to these podcasts that are structured directly for you. Um, and I mean, that's the thing that you're gonna have to do. You're gonna have to hack your learning process, right? And you're going to have to get up to date very, very quickly. The thing is that you were hired because they saw that you had the talent to do it. Um, so they wouldn't have, if they hire you, right? They wouldn't have done it on a whim, right? They saw something there. So you're going to have to figure out how you can get up to speed very, very quickly. But the reality is that they see something in you that they're willing to work with. I have no idea what they see. I'm lucky because Golang is pretty easy language to experience. Well, and so that's the interesting thing, right? Is once you've got your programming fundamentals down, and even if it's, in web or whatever, once you have the fundamentals down, um, a lot of stuff applies across the board, right? Um, so, if you're a front end dev wanting to move to back end, um, there's a lot of stuff that you learn in front end development that are fundamentals of back end development. There's a lot of stuff that you still need to learn, right? And it's the same like moving language to language. In the beginning, you'll write that language the way that you're most comfortable writing other languages, but eventually you'll start learning the ins and outs and start using that language well. And it's really, really similar to like learning a foreign language. So like when I was first learning Spanish, the way I spoke Spanish was more like an English speaker would speak Spanish, unless like a native Spanish speaker would speak Spanish. As I got more comfortable with the language and interacted more and more with people who natively spoke Spanish, then I started to learn the ins and outs of the Spanish language, and my Spanish stopped being like English in Spanish and more like Spanish, right? And it's the same way with any programming language. Um, the first languages that you learn are going to influence a lot the way you write your code. But as you start learning more and more about those languages, your code in that language will be more like that language and less like you writing another language in the new code. So I have no idea what they want me, but they seem convinced. Yeah, like queries, path params, middlewares, all stuff. Exactly. Um, there's a lot of fundamentals that you learn, and even more basic fundamentals than that, right? Like, how do you set up data structures? Um, you know, how do you evaluate data structures, and how do you evaluate algorithms for time and space complexity, right? What are the trade-offs, and why would you pick trade-offs of different data structures over other data structures? Like, fundamental things like that um, are going to translate across all types of programming. They're going to translate across all languages. And those are the things that are going to get you, they're going to get you further, right? In the very, very beginning. And it's like this, even, just as humans, right? With babies, we teach them the language first, right? We teach them to speak first, and then once they can speak, we start teaching them more and more abstract concepts. But we start very, very simple, right? My two girls, some of the very first things we taught them were colors, numbers, what do different animals say, and just things like that. So they could start understanding the language. And once they got a firmer and firmer grasp on the language, we started moving into more abstract concepts like, hey, it's not good if you pull your sister's hair. You shouldn't draw on the walls, right? And then as they get more and more comfortable with the language, then we start sending them to school where they start learning more and more abstract and advanced concepts like math and, then algebra and, calculus. Things get progressively more complicated. And that's the way I look at programming too, right? We start very, very fundamental, like what is an if statement? What is a for loop, right? And things like that. And then we like with if statements, we start talking about guard clauses and things like that, right? With for loops, we start talking about what is the optimal way to traverse a list, right? And is an array the optimal way to store data, right? So we start getting into data structures and things like that, and things start getting more and more complicated, more and more abstract, but more and more powerful. Fundamentals, state management, and persistence. Exactly, right? Managing state. What is a state transition? Things like that. You guys are 100% correct. So yeah, absolutely. And that's the way I recommend that you approach any new job. First of all, learn the structure of the organization, right? Learn who's who. And then, once you know who's who, start interacting with people and start developing relationships. Developing relationships is going to be very fundamental to you being able to progress in your career, which is kind of funny to say as a developer, right? Because um, we're often seen as like basement dwellers, right? And leave me alone and blah 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 blah, right? But that's not really the case. You have to be social, especially as teams grow and things like that. Understanding social dynamics, the politics of organizations, and then the structure of organizations is going to help you. And then don't be afraid to reach above, where you sit in an organization. Talk to your directors, talk to your VPs, talk to your C-level executives. Just reach out to their, if you're allowed to reach out to your people directly, reach out to them and say, hey, can I have 15 minutes? And just go in there and get to know them, right? And then if they've got like a secretary or somebody who helps with their scheduling, reach out to that person. Just be like, hey, I'd like to get on so and so schedule. Can I talk to them? And I'd like to get to know them and just figure out where I fit in the organization and stuff like that. You'll find that you'll get really, really good advice on your career, but they'll start recognizing you in the office, in the hallway, and stuff like that, and start saying hi, and start to see you as a peer. The second thing you want to do, relationships are always going to do really, really well for you. The second thing you want to do in a new job is learn what your company does, right? So, if your company is an auto auction, learn how auto auctions make money, right? When I worked at an auto auction, I would have thought that most of the auction's money came from selling cars across the block, and a good deal of their money does come from there, but a lot of the money that auto auctions make comes in the form of fees. So auto auctions offer services to repair the car to make it faster to sell, right? There are fees when the car crosses the block. The seller pays a certain amount of fee, and sometimes a buyer will pay fees. There are financing fees. There's all sorts of fees. So understanding how those fees are generated, and right, so understanding the business, that's important because that allows you to understand where you can apply your skills and get the most advantage. right? A lot of people will argue about the beauty of this, that, or the other, but really, if you can look at, hey, this is what's on the plate, and this is what we do to make money, and this is what I think will help the company the most, you're going to get a lot of value there. The third thing to do is start learning the code base, and things like that. And then the fourth thing to do is, um, make yourself valuable. Um, you know, find places where the company needs you, and you know get yourself into those places. And sometimes they may not even be in the places where you were hired. Um, so just be willing to figure out where you're needed, and then figure out how you can help. That's my advice. Everyone here is a professor of physics or epidemiology science professor. Oh wow, my data structures use state. Thank you for coming from React. The president is a famous professor who wrote books on complex systems. The science director is pretty interesting. Everyone here, see, that's amazing. Like, that is truly a dream position for me to be in, where I feel so underqualified, because that tells me that everybody that I interact with is going to teach me something. Um, I admit I will have fear going into a situation like that too, Abradores. But at the same time, that's a huge opportunity. Being able to interact on a day-to-day basis with people with those kinds of credentials, um, your ability to learn and grow as an engineer and as a person in that environment, that's huge. Outside of all the other benefits to your career and stuff like that, just the ability to grow. And that's one of the things that I look for in jobs. Obviously, I want to make enough to pay my bills, and to live the comfort level that we're used to, obviously, right? I'm not gonna lie and be like, oh yeah, money doesn't mean anything. Money means stuff, right? That's how we live. um, but at some point, what I'm looking for is something that's going to stretch me, that's going to encourage me to grow, that's going to give me opportunities to make me better. um, Yeah, exactly. Like, the stuff you're telling me about this job, it sounds amazing and very, very unique. Let's go take a look at our tour of heroes, because it's been a couple of weeks, and I want to make sure that everything is good. Like, this is fine. We do have the click event, right? Because that's how we're getting this stuff to work. So we know we've got our click event. Um, so we need the handler, right? And they've got this selected hero and unselected, right? Um, and I think we talked about this, that we don't want this on the component. We want to separate our state from our component, um, and there are a couple of reasons for that. And part of it goes back to the flashlight analogy I like to use, right? Where if we start mixing things together, it becomes very, very difficult to understand what is what. Uh, in my ideal architecture, when I'm working on things, I want my state separated from my display. Um, and this doesn't matter if it's web, or if I'm working on like a mobile device, or even if I'm writing like a desktop application. And I've worked on all three of these. And that's probably what informs my decision here. But the more logic you work into the display, the more difficult it is for you to add something new. Um, so when we're talking architecture, right? Um, and let's say we've got state here, right? And let's say that we overlap our UI just a little bit over our state, right? This is our UI. And this overlap is often going to exist everywhere. Um, the more we overlap, the more difficult it becomes for us to create new code, or new applications, right? because anytime we want to take and create something new, we have to consider this piece that overlaps, right? The smaller we can make this piece that overlaps, the more flexible our code will be and the more that we can reuse our code. And this is kind of the fundamental idea behind what they call onion architecture, right? In onion architecture, you design your code with different layers. And the way that you communicate between different layers are these things, the notion of ports, right? And so the innermost layer is like your business logic and things like that. It should be fundamental and core. These often in the area of modern architecture and stuff like this often exists in some sort of API layer, right? The next layer out is, well, this is like your database layer and your access layers for your databases and stuff, right? This is your data layer. This next layer out is your access layer in, right? This is typically your APIs and things like that, right? The next layer out can be your display logic and things like that, right? Your onion architecture allows you to build things in a way that you can make changes at this layer, but because you're using ports to move out, right, that have a defined API, these stay the same, so that allows you to change your inner business logic without affecting, the next layer out. And it's the same as you move out, right? And this is difficult to do with a trackball. That's why we're getting weird artifacts like this, right? But these ports are the way that these layers communicate with each other, which if done right, that means that you can change any layer, right? So your API layer should be able to change independently of your data access layer, right? Your display layer, your UI layer should be able to change independently of the other two layers, right? So that by structuring things this way, you make your architecture much more resilient. And we can look at this the same in like a web application, right? So in Angular, this could be our service layer, right? This could be our state layer, and we'll call that ST, right? For state. And this could be our actual UI layer. And the reason that we separate this way is that we should be able to change the service layer at any point in time, right? Maybe, and this is going on for me currently right now. We're trying to divest ourselves of GraphQL, and we're trying to make some changes. If there's a huge overlap between this layer and then the state layer, this becomes a very, very costly thing because now we're changing two layers, right? And when drawn correctly, the surface area of this layer is equivalent to the surface area of this layer, right? And it can become very, very costly, especially if all three of these layers are highly overlapped and interlinked and intertwined. The cost of making changes at this layer comes out to this layer and even the UI layer, right? When done right, onion architecture allows us to isolate, and that's what we're looking at here, right? By putting this property and this onSelect method inside of the component. And again, I'm not calling out the Tour of Heroes as being bad. What I am saying is that if you do this in your own architecture, you're causing that overlap, right? We've got this overlap because this is state, and this is transitional logic on that state. And so the reason that we want to separate this out. So this and this should go into a state file, right? Because our goal is to make our component purely reactionary. It should just react to changes in state. So when the state changes, then the UI reacts, right? And then the other um, responsibility of our UI layer is to provide a way for users to interact, right? So the on-click handler is important, and I typically will add something like this, but it's usually a wrapper that gets into state. Um, the most common architecture is spaghetti architecture, onion architecture. It is similar to DDD. So DDD and onion architecture kind of go hand in hand. DDD is a way of looking at your architecture, right, where you break things up into domains. And then there's a structured way to communicate across our domains, right? And within the domains, you could have subdomains, right? And, you know, this might be the user domain, and your subdomain might have auth or permissions or things like that in it, right? And this might be your sales cart domain, and within that you might have the actual shopping cart, you might have product listings and things like that, or this might be the product domain, right? And within that you have your shopping cart and things like that, right? And it's very, very important that you map out your domains with the understanding of what they are before you start doing, like, DDD is very, very structured way of looking at architecture. DDD and onion architecture can coexist hand in hand, right? Because the idea of onion architecture is that you structure everything in such a way that the layers can be replaced. DDD tells you what that structure might look like, right? So they're similar, but they serve different purposes. And onion architecture works really well in a lot of instances. Some people call it hexagonal architecture too. So like if you want to look it up online, onion architecture or hexagonal architecture. I was introduced to it in, I think I have the book right here with me. Let me see. Oh, I do. So the same guy who wrote Clean Code wrote Clean Architecture. And this is the book that introduced me to hexagonal architecture and onion architecture and things like that. It's a good book, and it gives you insight into a lot of good fundamentals that you can start using to explore to get into architecture. And actually, if you guys are curious, I really only have 3 books here. So I've got Clean Architecture, I've got I've got Design Patterns, right? The Gang of 4. And then, I have the DDD Bible, right? Those are my those are the 3 books that are always close at hand when I'm writing software. And those are the 3 books that I tend to read. This book, the DDD, it's implementing design-driven or domain-driven design. This book is probably the most technical book I own. And when I'm reading this book, I often find myself rereading paragraphs and chapters because this is very, very technical. These other 2 books are much more approachable. So Design Patterns, this is the Gang of 4. If you search for like GOF or Design Patterns or whatever, this is the book that you're going to find. And then Clean Architecture is just, it's the same. It's Uncle Bob, same guy who wrote Clean Code. I don't use Clean Code as much anymore. I like the ideas in Clean Code, but it's become a very contentious book. And so I thought those birds were burned during the Reformation in Europe. That's that's the devil. But yeah, at some point in your career, and this goes back to the discussion like babies, right? And how we learn as humans. Early on in your career, it's very, very important that you learn a language. So if you're still in that phase where you're still learning languages, that's fine. You're perfectly okay. Um, but at some point, learning languages and picking up new languages isn't going to help you that much. At some point in your career, you're going to have to start transitioning into theory. And that, like, I would say, like, the first 60% of my career was me focusing solely on languages and things like that. I didn't understand the need for theory. And the earlier you understand the need for theory, the faster your career will accelerate. As soon as I started studying theory, things like clean architecture, things like design patterns, things like domain-driven design, and started getting out of arguing about the code itself and the languages and things like that, and started thinking more about the bigger picture, my career accelerated incredibly fast once I started getting into theory. And so that's why, wherever you are in your career, as long as you feel like you're moving forward, and as long as you feel like your learning journey is working for you at this moment, you're perfectly fine, right? Keep doing what you're doing. As soon as you get to a point where you're like, well, where do I go next? Start digging into theory. And once you start digging into theory, you start realizing just how much you don't know about programming, and about engineering and things like that. Um, it's almost infinite what you can learn once you start digging into theory. Um, right? Like, there's only so much you can learn about languages, but theory is it's a deep ocean. And I'm constantly reminded by just how much I don't know about engineering and development and architecture and things like that as I work through this stuff. So um, we have not written any code today, even though I really intended to. Um, but I this stuff I think is important. And that so I call myself an Angular stream, but I look at the stream as more, we use Angular as a vehicle to discuss how to level up your career as an engineer, right? Um, I I don't, if all you guys learned from this stream is Angular, I'm perfectly happy with that. Um, but if you learn from my stream things that allow you to move from a junior to a mid to a senior, um, that's a huge win for me as far as I'm concerned. Um, because the more, right, and if you figure out how to move from a senior to a tech lead to a staff to a principal to a director to who knows what, those are huge wins for me because we need more people doing moving up through the careers. It's not a zero sum game. If you get better at programming, that doesn't make me worse, right? If you get better at programming, that makes the entire community better. And that's what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for like, I do want people to learn Angular. I like Angular a lot. I think Angular is amazing. But what I'm more interested in is creating solid engineers that are going to help their companies or their teams or things do better things. So we need more people who put in more effort. The amount of effort people put in these days is very low, and that's true, right? Um, and it's again, I I keep coming back to this statement, right? But um, nothing ever exists as a true one or a zero, right? Nothing's ever a true binary, or um, except for like except for programming, right? In programming, everything's a binary. But in reality, your company doesn't exist entirely as low effort engineers, right? And high effort engineers, right? High effort, right? The reality is everybody exists somewhere in this area, this gray area in between, right? Um, and so, maybe your company sits more here with more low effort, um, or maybe it sits here with more high effort. But they're like, when you get entirely over here at high effort, you wind up with weird situations where you wind up arguing so much about high level concepts that work doesn't get done. If you're over here on low effort, the thing I like about, and I'm not sure I like the terms that I'm using here, but the low effort engineers in a lot of cases want to come to work, they want to get their work done, and then they want to go home and focus on things that are important to them, right? Um, and these are the workhorses of the organization. These are the ones that are churning out code, right? This end is typically the thinkers and the people who spend a lot of time thinking in, right? There's a pendulum swing here. And as the pendulum swings too far this way, you start getting less and less code written. As you start swinging more this way, you get more code written, but it's lower quality code, right? Our goal as engineers is to figure out where is the sweet spot for our organization and to stop the pendulum from swinging as wildly, right? Figure out how to make the center where the sweet spot is for our organization, and it may be that the sweet spot for our organization is here, so we try to move the center to here, and then we try to keep the pendulum swinging around this area instead of back and forth between this entire area, right? And that's the way that we can add value to our company, is by recognizing, what do we need, and how do we keep our company in that area where we need to be. So, um, a lot, and this is why, I put out on social media, I'm looking forward to writing code. The higher you get in an organization, and the funny thing is, the higher you get as an engineer, the less code you write, and the more you spend time teaching others, and the more you spend time writing justifications, and the more time you spend writing, this is what we need to be doing. So the bar was low. The other two seniors couldn't answer what a peer function was. One guy told me to stop doing trap questions. Oh, yeah. Trying to hire a mid to senior dev who doesn't know what a peer function is crazy. We hired him anyway. It you have to realize that in any industry, there are people who just want to show up, just want to do their work, and collect their check and go home. And there's nothing wrong with that. That gets the work done, right? Um, so you can have a solid engineer, or well, you can have a solid coder, right, who doesn't know what a peer function is. They've just never had the need to know, right? They may even use peer functions in their day-to-day work, but they just have never needed to know, right? When you It really comes down to what the organization wants to optimize for. So yeah, I think you need to cut a short video about books. Um, awesome, Ole. I will do that. I'll put out another short on the books. So I'll go and I'll cut that as soon as YouTube is done processing this stream. I'll go ahead and put together another short video and share that out. I appreciate the suggestion. Um, um, so, and I'll include the part about the theory being more important than learning the languages. But he did React and Angular as well, both of them at senior level. He also didn't know what a service is, that a service is a singleton. And it doesn't have to be a singleton, right? It really depends on where you inject the service. The reason that services in Angular are singletons is because of the DI. Um, and I'm not sure. This is where my knowledge of React becomes a little bit flaky. But I'm not sure how the DI, like what DI containers you can use in React, and how to make like different things singletons in React. That's, I'm at the edge of my knowledge there. Right. It's module scoped, exactly. Um, and that's the like when I interview somebody, my goal is for them to succeed and feel like they came out of the interview and had a good interview, right? Um, and I did like your statement that you were trying to make it easy and things like that. Um, I'm not a big fan of like Jeopardy style interviews where they throw a whole bunch of terms at you and you have to define them and things like that. Um, Obviously, interviewing and job hunting in our industry sucks. And the reality is, you don't know how a person is going to fit in a job until they do it for a while. The problem is that our industry is so high knowledge and there's such a high bar of entry that by the time you figure out that somebody isn't a good fit, you've probably spent a ton of money onboarding them, right? Um, and so that's why we invent these crazy interviewing processes and onboarding, like, right? We've got all these crazy processes that don't even really tell us whether that person's going to be good, right? That's the thing that is interesting to me, is that we go through like these Google style interviews, on optimizing trees and stuff, right? Like that's the meme in our industry, right? Is you go in and you learn all these processes for optimizing trees and things like that, and then you spend the rest of your time working in CSS adjusting colors, right? Like, how does that have anything to do with what you're actually going to be doing at the job? You need at least an hour or two. Yeah, you interviewing is just, it's so difficult. It's so easy to get wrong, and I'm not even sure I've ever been part of like a truly amazing successful interviewing process. I think I've been parts of processes that don't suck as much as others. But I don't think that there's ever an interviewing process out there that doesn't suck, um, and that isn't going to hire engineers that you're going to be like, yeah, maybe we didn't work out, right? Um, and that's just it's just the reality of our industry. Like when I was younger, um, I worked on a potato farm, right? And one of my first jobs was moving wheel lines, and wheel lines are like these big, um, pipes that go the length of half the field. Um, and they meet in the center, and in the center they connect to what we called the main line, and that's where the water from the pump ran through, and you would connect them to these risers that came out of the ground. Your job was to basically move these lines from riser to riser so that they moved across the field, and then you would do what we called a rollback, where we would roll them back to the beginning. We would change the offsets so that you weren't always watering the same spot, and then move them across the field again, right? um, the barrier to entry in that field was super easy, right? You had to be strong enough to detach the pipe from the riser. You had to be strong enough to attach the motor to the wheel line. You had to be strong enough to be able to move the wheels to make sure the wheel line would stay in, basically the right area. And that was basically it, right? The barrier to entry was really, really low. Training somebody to move wheel lines, you could probably do it in 2 days, right? And if they showed up and they were like, "Yeah, I want to move wheel lines," you just hired them, right? Because not a lot of people want to move wheel lines. And you would go out and you would teach them for a couple of days, and they were probably good to move wheel lines the entire summer. And then whenever wheel lines were rolled back, usually everybody who moved wheel lines on the farm came to help, or a good group of people came to help, because it was just a really long, laborious process. Um, but right, like in that industry, the barrier to entry is really, really low, right? The pay is also reflective of the barrier to entry, right? Um, in our industry, if I hire a junior, I am going to expect it to take maybe a month, maybe 2 months, maybe 3 months before they're even productive in the code base, right? It's going to take that long to learn the code. And sure, I may throw some small bugs at them, but in general, for a junior, I expect a couple of months for them to even get up to speed, right? Well, the pay in our industry is higher. And so that's 3 months of pay that I'm investing in somebody before I can even make a determination if they're going to be useful, right? And maybe as you get higher, that period increases, right? Because now they have to learn organizations and things like that. So the amount of investment that goes into people is way higher, and that's why, if somebody shows up and they're like, I want to move wheel lines, great. You can move wheel lines, right? If somebody shows up and they're like, hey, I want to be a programmer, well, we try to ask questions like this, right? And we try to put them through tests and all this other stuff because we're hoping that we can get some sort of signal that says, yeah, these guys would probably be good. But the reality is, we don't know until they've been at the organization long enough that we can expect things out of them, and then we can start evaluating them. So that's kind of the reality of where we are, and that's why hiring and interviewing sucks so much in our industry. Because when you're going and you're asking somebody for a job, right? When you're applying for a job, what you're basically saying is, hey, I want you to invest in the US, I want you to invest, $25 to $100,000 in me to see if I'm even going to be able to do what I say I can do, right? And that's a big pill to swallow for most organizations. And I'm sure the numbers are very, very similar in a lot of other places. And it's the same with consulting and things like that, right? We're asking people to invest money in us until we're able to provide, and then we hope that that person that we're investing money in is able to provide at a level that our investment was worth it. Um, that's why open source is a good thing, because I can always say, good, yeah, look at my open source contributions, since all my work is open source. And that's true, right? Like there are things that you can do to help people understand how you write code and understand how you think. Like writing articles, producing social media, things like that. If somebody wants to see how I think, they could go watch one of my streams and look at like these side tangents that we get off on, right? Like today they can look at what are my thoughts on hiring, what are my thoughts on architecture, what are my thoughts on different things like that, right? Like how am I going to approach leveling up my career as I get a new job. They can get all of that stuff from watching what we talked about today. And so there's a benefit to that. And I will admit that my interviewing process is probably a lot easier than a lot of people out there, because I go into an interview and people are like, hey, I watched your YouTube video, hey, I read your this or that or the other, or hey, I looked at this repo. And so we skip past a whole bunch of stuff. So yeah. Exactly. I've been stuck here, and we've been drawing on top of it and doing all this stuff. And we didn't even need the click handler. But this is the important part of why I stream. I don't stream to teach code, right? Because if I wanted to just teach code, I would just put together, like a course on something. I do want people to learn code, and I want people to learn good habits as I write code. But the reason I stream is to help everybody who attends my stream learn things. And that's why I'm perfectly fine with you asking questions like you have, Operadores. And I'm perfectly fine with the comments that people make and things like that. I'm not here to be like, we're going to do, I'm not here to lay down the law. I'm here to hopefully be a resource. And maybe my streams are more like office hours, right? Where people can come um, and hopefully learn something about how to be engineers. And like our industry is very, very scary right now. um that's one thing that I definitely want to um I want to acknowledge. Our industry is very scary right now. There are layoffs going on everywhere. uh, I read an article the other day that if you have a job right now in the tech industry, you're unlikely to lose it for the next year. But if you don't have a job in the tech industry, you're unlikely to find a job in the industry. Um, it's just that bad right now, with the number of layoffs, and you're competing against high level engineers because it's not just anybody being laid off. It's like whole teams, right? Companies are just getting rid of whole teams, which include all levels of engineers. So you're competing against people who are very, very talented. Like my job search this earlier this year took 4 months. That's the longest it's ever taken me to find a job. So yeah, yeah, exactly, Abrolores. I mean, at some point, something has to change in our industry, and so um, taking the time right now to invest in yourself is the best thing you can do. Um, and um, yeah, I mean that's the best thing you can do is just invest in yourself. Um, so exactly, exactly. Yeah, ova o la spa. Is it spacha? Ova o la spacha, which means it either goes or it breaks, one of the two. And that's I think that sentiment is summed up really well with the in the U.S. with the millennium slang or millennial slang of YOLO, right? You only live once. Um, let's let's give it a shot. Either we succeed or we fail, right? But you only live once. That's kind of the uh, that's been the U.S. attitude, at least for as long as I've been aware of it. It's like, let's give it a shot. If it fails, it fails, and we move on. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Startup mentality, exactly. Um, and it's a healthy mentality to have, um, because one of the biggest problems that a lot of people will run into is the idea that I can't get started because of all of the ways that it can fail, right? We paralyze ourselves with over analyzing problems. And sometimes you just need to dive in, right? And I've experienced this with coworkers too, who will spend a ton of time looking at, like, well, what if this happens? Well, what if this happens? Well, what if this happens, right? Um, well, we'll address it when it happens. We don't need to address it now. Right now, what we need to do is start doing something. Um, and then that something is going to help us understand, could this happen, or could this happen, or could this happen. And they may never happen, or they may happen extremely rarely to the point where it's not even worth worrying about, right? So yeah, carpe diem, exactly. Seize the day. Latin, going back to Obradores, right? The roots of your country, Rome, right? Carpe diem is another great phrase to be. I've seen way too many 5-year experienced Java devs who can't even do the most basic stuff. This is the result of being too comfortable at your work. It is. And again, those devs are going to be junior to mid for the rest of their lives, right? And that's okay. We need junior and mid-level devs. Um, it's the people who care. And the like I'm basically preaching to the choir here, right? Because the same people who don't learn aren't going to be the ones who attend streams like this, right? The people who are here attending the stream already care enough that you guys are seeking out ways to get better. Um, and so right, like we need the people who are just going to churn through code because it gives the people who care about things more time to think. And so it's very, very important. And it, I it's tough to talk about this without sounding like I'm trying to talk down to one group or the other. I don't want it to be that way. Both groups are equally important as far as I'm concerned. And you need a balance and a good mix of both groups at any organization to be healthy. There needs to exist a healthy tension in a lot of things in any organization because that tension keeps things healthy and it keeps one side from becoming too strong and overpowering the other. Um, the problem is that we tend to get in these echo chambers, right? Because the same people who are attending conferences, the same people who are reading blogs, the same people who are attending streams, like you guys are taking time out of your day to come hang out with me. Right, there's a real cost to what you're doing, and so the same people that do this, we're self-selecting for people who are going to have more desire and more drive. And so quite often we see the other side as being lazy or whatever, right? And that's not really the case. The case is that in the hierarchy of importance to you, what we're talking about today is important. In the hierarchy of people who aren't here and aren't doing that, the importance to them is whatever they're doing that's not this, right? And they're good at their jobs or they wouldn't have their jobs, right? They're good at what they do within those jobs. But they're, because of what's important to them, they aren't worried about advancing beyond where they are. And that's perfectly fine, right? But it's also very, very difficult for people who, I hate to make this an us versus them, right? Where I say like people like us who want to advance and things like that. But, we're a self-selecting group. It's very, very difficult for me to understand somebody who doesn't want to get better, who is perfectly complacent with where they are in the programming world, because to me my values are I need to get better, right? And I want to make everybody else better. Those are my values. So it's very, very difficult for me when I run into somebody who doesn't have that same value. I can't understand them because my point of reference is entirely different than their point of reference, right? um, we're both important to the organization, and that's one of the big realizations that it's taken me a long time to understand. um you're fired, yeah. It is difficult. It is very difficult, and our industry is becoming more and more harsh because there are fewer and fewer jobs, and AI is weeding out the jobs that are able to be done by people who don't care, right? And I don't want to even say don't care. They care about their job, or they wouldn't have it, right? Nobody ever goes to work and says, "I don't care about my job. I'm going to do the worst job I can today." Nobody. There's nobody who says that. Everybody tries to do the best that they can. But AI is weeding out the lower levels of our industry. And the problem with that is the lower levels are where we create the people who move up to the higher levels. And we're going to run into a real issue where we aren't getting that feeder of people who keep moving up. And I worry about that day. But right now, my goal is to help people who are concerned about AI, right? What do we do? How do we differentiate ourselves? Oh, what an interesting. I never anticipated. Like I've been in the tech industry for a long time, and I didn't anticipate that AI would be eating our industry alive the way it is. In fact, early on, you can go back and watch my videos where I was like, yeah, AI will do some things, but it won't ever be able to replace an engineer. And I still believe that, but I think that the AI companies whose sole reason for existing is to take money from big companies and other people have convinced those big companies that those big huge paychecks that they're paying to these AI companies um, are going to, they can get rid of developers because they're paying these big huge chunks of money to these AI companies. um, and that's what's coming. That's what's happening right now, right? Like these big companies that need to survive and need big companies to give them money are doing a very good job of convincing companies that they need to give them money. And when companies give money, they've got to come up with that money someplace else, and typically they do that by shrinking their workforce, right? um, yeah. Well, I'm going to get 3 pizzas and eat them: calabrese, salamino, and a maialino. What's a maialino? I know calabrese and I know salamino. What's a maialino? Um, my opinion is AI is garbo. I think AI helps us, but um, the thing is, to understand that AI can't replace engineers, you need a level of competence in software that most stakeholders. Exactly. You're 100% correct there, Johanderson. Search it on Google. It's funny. Okay. Maybe I'll do it after the stream. I actually have to end at noon today. Um, I need to get my hair cut. And so I'm getting my hair cut after the stream today. I need to make sure I end on time. Yeah. It's our word versus the word of a company whose value proposition is saving millions. Exactly. That's exactly it, right? And the problem is like the short term optimization, right? That company is saving millions in the short term, but we don't know what the long term cost of that short term optimization is. My belief is that when we reach an equilibrium, what we're going to find is at least for the next little while, once we get out of kind of this AI bubble, is we're going to find that developers and engineers will write most of the net new code. Where AI is going to help us the most is we're going to have AI agents that will be working on the code very similar to like what we're doing with like SonarQube. But instead of SonarQube going, hey, you've got these issues, our AI agents are going to be crawling through our code base, right? And they're going to be like, oh, there's this issue. And they'll make changes based on that issue that they've encountered. And then we'll probably have humans that review, their pull requests based on the issues that they've fixed, and approve those pull requests. And maybe that process will be slightly different. Who knows? Maybe we trust the agents enough that humans won't be reviewing their PRs, or who knows what, right? But I think that's where we're going to go, where the AI agents will be able to do things that are very I don't want to say scriptable, but very repeatable and very kind of rote. I don't know how to describe it better than that, but um like things that one of the things that when if maybe I'm stressed out or frustrated at work, there are two things that I like to do in that case. I like to write unit tests, and I like to go through code and find areas that I can fix. Because those are two places where I can get quick and easy wins, but they're also places where I don't have to invest a lot of mental time, right? Unfortunately, those are the two places where AI is really, really good. AI tends to be really, really good at writing unit tests, and AI tends to be really, really good at fixing those code errors, right? So the places where I tend to retreat to find Zen and still be productive are also the places where I think AI um, is going to take over, right? Like the static code analysis, you used a double equals instead of a triple equals. and the changes that it makes based on that. Um, that's where I think things are going to equalize to, and maybe I'm wrong because I was wrong about AI eating our industry alive, right? Um, but just in looking at what AI can do, in looking at what I see other companies doing, that's where I think the true value of AI will shine through. It's not in creating net new code. It's not necessarily even in vibe coding, and maybe vibe coding will get better. Who knows? Well, it probably will. We'll be honest. It probably will get better. But where I see AI really helping with the current generation of AI that we have now is in kind of a symbiotic partnership, right? Where AI can look at what humans have produced and make those small tweaks that make it better. You know, hey, you didn't use a wait on an async function that returns a boolean. Hey, you used a double equals instead of a triple equals. Hey, this section of code is never encountered. Hey, right, like this kind of stuff. I think AI agents are going to do that, and I think that's a good thing because a lot of errors in software that leads to like huge losses are often boundary check errors where AI will be really, really good. Often accessor errors where AI will be really, really good at finding and fixing those, right? Humans understand the overall concept and can translate the concept of the business into code. AI is going to take that code that humans have produced and be like, oh, this isn't secure, or right, things like that. I expected AI to be like Navi, not Blink. Exactly. Hey, listen. But yeah, let's get into some code. It's been fun talking about this kind of stuff, and if you guys want to keep talking about it, definitely keep answering questions or asking questions. I'll keep talking, right? But I do really want to get into some code, and I do want to talk about this snippet of code here, right? Because there's some issues that I have with this section of code. Um, but let's copy it and let's create let's create a component for our selected hero. I think that's the right way to go about this. So, and I haven't even opened WebStorm. That's how far behind we are today. Um, so we'll get WebStorm open and we'll create a new component for this section of code specifically. And we'll talk about we want to talk about some interesting pieces here because again this is a very imperative way of writing, and this is something you're going to see in a lot of code as you encounter Angular, right? You're going to have this if, and that's logic in the code that has to be tested. um, but it's logic in the template, and that's one of the big problems with code like that. um, Thank you, Gemini. Let's get you out of the way. Let's get you out of the way. NX console available. I do have the NX console. Configure plugins. Nothing suggested. Oh, I've got. Who knows? I'm not even sure what's going on. That's hilarious that it. In the Gemini release notes. Okay. But let's. So right now, the place where this stuff is going to show up is right here in the hero store selected hero to JSON. We want to make this a component. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's take a look at our project. And within our components, let's go ahead and generate a new component. So we're going to use the NX generator, and we're going to generate a component. We want to generate an Angular component. What is going on here? This is kind of fun. It's like it's not drawing everything out. Let's try doing this again. So new NX, or actually we want to go to the NX generate. Let's look at a component. And we want a new Angular component. So there we go. That was really, really strange. So it's going to put it in the components. The path to the component relative to the working directory, we're going to leave alone. We're not going to export it because we don't have a module. We definitely want it to be standalone. So for our change detection strategy, we're always going to go to on push because we're using signals and we're using zoneless. So we want on push to kind of help us here. Display block. I suggest doing, well, we'll do this. Because we're using Daisy UI and we're using Tailwind, we can add block to our component itself. Well, I'll show you how we change that, right? Export default. This is if you want to have a default export for your component. And so this changes the way you can use like imports and stuff. We're going to inline our style and inline our template. And somebody asked me about that recently. Why do I inline my style and why do I inline my template? I tend to like inlining style is something that I've started doing, but I don't do it as often in older projects because style inside of my HTML for whatever reason broke my brain. But I'm doing it more and more. But the reason that I inline my style in my templates is I want my style and my templates to contribute to the size of my code file. There's a bit of anxiety that I feel when my code file reaches a certain size. And when my style or when my template is separate from my component itself, sometimes the size and complexity of my component is, or my template is hidden because we don't look at template files like code. When it exists in the same file as my component, it tends to cause that level of anxiety that makes me want to fix things. So that's why I do it. No module. The name. So here we can add component here. I think it's going to do that anyway. And so now you can see the .ng HTML on the template file. Prefix selector, skip import, skip selector, skip tests. We're not going to skip any of that. We're going to leave CSS here. Here, so it defaults to component for Angular versions below 20. For 20 and above, no type is open. I'm going to, we're going to follow the Angular style guide here. And we're not going to worry about view encapsulation. But here, right here, we want to change our component. And I can't even see what I'm typing here. This is a bit weird. So like you can see that my path is FFFF, but I can't even see that, which is annoying. So this component is going to be our hero detail. And so now we can see down here that it's our hero detail. And it's going to generate it in the components, and that's fine. I actually don't like the, it's telling me that it wouldn't add the component, but so one thing we're going to do, and I can't see where this is happening, so we're going to wipe everything out. We're just going to go hero dash detail. And I'm not sure what's going on here. There we go. We can at least see it if I highlight it. So I prefer my files to be named this way. I think we're going to see things named differently as we get out of the component, but for now, things are set up to use a component for whatever reason, and I'm fine with that. So we're going to go ahead and generate this. So there we go. We've now generated our component. I'm not really sure what's going on with the... not really sure what's going on with the style there. It's a little bit weird. But anyway, this is our tour of hero detail. Right now we're importing the common module. I don't even think we need the common. Well, we probably do because of the stuff we're using. So here is our component. We're going to have to fix this up. Like we're already using an ngIf. We don't want that. The other thing is we've got a display block in here. We could change this by taking out the display block, and instead we can add a host binding. So we can say host, boom, and we can add the class block like it's suggesting. So we can do this because we're using Tailwind, and Tailwind has a block class. So, Johanderson, template and style collocation is a great benefit. Also, you're encouraged to author small components. Exactly. Totally agree with you, Johanderson, 100%. So we've got this notion of a selected hero and all of this stuff, right? There are a couple of ways we can handle this. So one of the ways we could do it is we could have a selected hero, and we could say, hey, this is an input. That's a hero. Right, and we could use inputs, which is perfectly fine, right? And there's nothing wrong with this because this is going to work the way we want. Let's take a look at our hero store. So our selected hero in our hero store, where does our selected hero? So our selected hero is already a hero or undefined. So we're going to allow it to be the same. I'm not a big fan of like null and undefined, but you know, it is what it is, to use the old adage. One of the things we don't want to do here is we don't want to we don't want this if statement here. We want to move that out. The other thing is that this input, we'll use it for now, but this model binding isn't going to work. But for now we'll follow along, and then we'll fix it up, right? So the first thing we want to do is we want to say if we have a selected hero. Well, actually, instead of that, we can say, hey, let selected hero equals selected hero, right? And is that? Sometimes I'm using linked signal with nullable values in form. I like your idea with the linked signal. So let's try renaming this to just hero and see if it's colliding, right? So hero. There we go. So we're going to say hero here. And hero. So now we've got our hero. We need to, I think we could probably just well, we don't actually need this. We can just say at if hero here and push this in, which allows us to get rid of a lot of divs, right? Get rid of some of our div spam. Oh, did I? Dang it. I still had a multi-select going on. That's the problem. We can get rid of that. Oh, we need to go back a ways. So we can put this back. Boom. And that's fine. And now we can say at if hero. I was like, what is going on? Well, what's going on is that I was not being smart. So there we go. So there's our hero. So now we've got our selected hero. The other thing that we can do, because we're using we can make this an H2, right? Because we're using our control flow structures, we can have an else. So we can have a template that shows up if no hero is selected. So now we've got our hero name, our hero ID, and our input. For right now, it's trying to bind to ng model. So we'll bring that in, right? So we can bring in our forms module. Actually, I think we can just bring in ng model ng model now, right? That's fine. Forms module. There we go. And our two-way binding isn't going to work, but at least now we can see, oh, this isn't going to do anything. This is a common thing I make, common issue I make all the time. If we want this to work, we actually have to come in here and we have to say tour of heroes detail, selected hero, plus hero store.selected hero. And we're going to have to import that. We've imported our hero detail components. And there we go. So now if we go to our browser, should be able to go back here. And so now it's telling us, hey, select a hero. Right, so we've got our different heroes. And as we select them, we're getting the inputs that we need. One thing we aren't getting is we aren't getting nice HTML. We can fix that. So I'm curious why Okay, so we're adding the not pros here because we were running into some issues with pros. Um, but here we can add the pros back. So if we look at that, yeah, now we get the bigger windstorm and all of that. It looks better. I don't know. Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. Um, oh, well, I also added it to the wrong place. No, I didn't. It's the right place. But notice one of the things that I didn't do is I didn't say, hey, I didn't add my if statement here. My if statement exists in the hero details component, and that's on purpose, right? I want the API of my hero details to be able to handle the case where I have a hero or where I don't have a hero. And the reason for that is I don't want the cognitive overload or overhead, not overload, overhead of somebody having to remember that, hey, I can only pass in a selected hero here, or I can only pass a hero in here. It doesn't handle the undefined. Um, that's an important piece of when you create your components. We're going to go a little bit deeper here because right now, if we go back to our hero view, say I come in and I change Windstorm to be Jason. Oh, I did not expect that to work. Why does that work? That's crazy. So the two-way binding, is on the. So when we pass this in, we're passing in the value of the hero store selected hero. This gives us a signal, but the signal is two-way bound. And it's because I made this an input. Interesting. I did not expect this to work. That just goes to show how much more I need to learn about signals too. One thing we want to do is we want to add some classes to this. Class equals inputs. If we do just that much, what do we get? There we go. So if I select Dr. Nice here and I change this to be like Ole, and then I come down to Bombasto and back, it works. Here, if we change that to be Johanderson, that is crazy. Like, I'm legit getting two-way binding on this, but I think it's because I'm passing in an object. And because I'm updating the object, and then there's signals that are being updated, that object is this. I'm mutating the object, which I shouldn't be doing. Like, I'm getting a whole bunch of things. You had a similar issue on a project, and so here's the thing that we've got, right, is we've got our store, right? Our store. And within our store, we've got different heroes. And these are objects. And so when we bind it equals this, right? We're binding the object. And it's not that we're actually updating anything here. We're actually binding the object. And the problem with this is that we're mutating this object, right? And the reason it's working is that because we're using signals, we're getting change detection on come on. Oh, it's because I'm still in drawing mode, that's why. We're getting change detection on this signal. Right, the change detection is firing because we've got this two-way binding going on here, and this two-way binding is on a signal, and that's so weird. Basically, we're triggering some change detection here. And because we're triggering the change detection, and because we're mutating an object, the only reason this works is because of side effects. And that makes this dangerous code, in my opinion. We don't want dangerous code. So there are a couple ways to fix this. One thing I would like to do is let's make the label a part of the input. And the only reason I like to make that change is that now when I click the label, I automatically focus on the input, right? So, you know, it's just a good quality of life. If I click here, I can change this to be, you know, Jason. And I can't even spell my own name, but we don't want, yeah, we always trigger change detection, yeah. And yeah. Let's take a look at your. If we take a look here, yeah, exactly, exactly. This is the problem, right? Is that you're mutating an object in this code, and this is a problem with Signal Store. Because with Signal Store, we don't want our code to mutate. And you know what? I'm curious. That's not what I was looking for. I'm very, very curious here. Because if we bring up the console, is Signal Store complaining? No. See, I was hoping that Signal Store would complain and tell me, hey, you're mutating an object, right? Because we are mutating an object outside of the update cycle. And the reason this is dangerous is that we're relying on side effects. And if a change detection doesn't fire doing something like this, you wind up with these weird situations where you're thinking change detection doesn't work. The only reason this is working is because we're mutating this object and we're getting change detection because of the key up event, right? Because of the events that are fired by the input, and that's causing change detection. We don't want to rely on that. What we want is we want to go through the store and we want everything to react to the store. With immutable state. Yeah, well, it won't do it itself, right? Okay, so Signal Store doesn't react. Okay, that's interesting. So the Angular architects build in a place where we have some issues. Um, okay, this is pretty bright, but we could fix that. So this is with immutable state. And really we only want it in we only want this protection in. This is perfect. I like this. Thank you for sharing, Ola. Um, this extensions are great. Um, with Redux, that's cool. Yeah, because of the events, you don't need that. Storage sync. Um, oh, they've even got undo redo. This isn't too difficult to implement yourself, but having somebody else do it. So let's add these extensions. So we will drop to our shell. And we're going to install the NGRX toolkit from Angular Architects. Thanks for pointing that one out. We're going to be using some storage sync is amazing. We'll have to play with some of this stuff, but this with immutable state is a big deal. I like the with. There's a lot of good stuff in here. So let's go ahead, and now that we've got that going, we can serve again. And let's go here and let's make sure that we commit that we added. We don't need that. Page that. Page that. Nothing changed there. The rest of this stuff is the stuff that we've made changes to so far. Oh, I reached my weekly limit. I need to upgrade. That's okay. We added. That's crazy that I reached my weekly limit. I only had a couple, huh? Added. We added the. Oh, what's it called? NGRX toolkit. We'll call it NGRX toolkit. There we go. We can push that. Okay, so now what we can do is we can go back to our browser here and we can look at with immutable state. And so instead of using state, we do with immutable state. So instead of okay. So if we go back to our store here, instead of doing with state, we do with immutable state. So there we go. Did I bring it in? I did. Why doesn't it like it here? So they're using with immutable state, initial state. Interesting. So I can't use a factory method. Well, I can. So create heroes view. So instead of doing that, I would just do this. Yep. So instead of passing a factory to the state, we just create the state. And so now when we go test this out, so now if I try to change this to be like JSON, yeah, now it's broken. This is what I was expecting to have happen. And this is a good thing. What we had before is actually not good. And yeah, we're getting that name is read only. Perfect. So it's keeping us from mutating the state. Yeah, for the binding. I haven't tried immutable state, but this so and there's a good reason why we want this stuff, right? So again, if we test this, we're gonna get, hey, the name is read only. And the reason we want our state to be immutable is we don't want to be relying on side effects of mutations. And this is something that I've pushed for a long time. Our state should always be immutable. Yeah, we know it works, and it works well. And this is what we expect, right? Like if I come here and I type test, I'm getting errors in the console, which is exactly what I want. Because I don't want mutations to this object to be causing problems elsewhere. And the reason for that is we're relying on side effects in our code to make our code work, which can lead to unexpected situations in the future. Instead, now we're being forced to follow through and do this in a proper manner. The first thing I would do is now what we would have to do is, instead of this, now we would have to be like hero name changed, right, equals output string, right? And then we would call this method whenever the output changes, right? I don't want to do that. This leads to a situation that prop drilling. And what prop drilling is let's say we've got component 1, right? And component 1 has property A. And then we've got, a child of component 1 that does not use property A, right? So this is a child relationship here. And then we've got component 3 that is a child of component 2, and it uses A, right? Well, in a pure, and these are horrible, right? In a pure input and output situation, what we would wind up with is an input for A, right? So this would drill into here. And then we would also have an input for A that we drill into here, right? And then when A changes, we get an output here that we drill into here so that we can pass it to here, right? This is not a desirable situation. And this is what we wind up with, what we call prop drilling, because we're drilling through this component. And the only reason this component cares about what's going on here is because because we have to have an input here to have the input here that we use. We have to have an output here to deal with the output here that we have, right? And it's just passing stuff through components. And, these components are contained within each other, right? So this is a child of this main component. And it's just an ugly situation to deal with. And you get these long chains of inputs and outputs that only exist for the sole reason of passing data through, right? So what do we do in situations like this? Well, we do services. Well, guess what? We've already got a service. Our hero store is a service. So one of the first things we can do is we can get rid of this, and we can say, hey, let's protected read only. And here we can say, hey, we want a hero store. And it's going to be inject heroes store, right? Heroes store. So now we're injecting our hero store. And you know, there's our hero store. And the benefit to this, and the reason this works, right, is due to the way that the Angular injector, DI injector works. So with the DI injector, and we've got our store here, and it's provided at this component level, right? So our hero store is provided in the heroes view model. We can inject this store here, right? We can inject S here. And because it's not going to find it here, it's going to go up a level, and it's going to find it on the component provider for a parent, and so it's going to go, oh yeah, we can do this, right? This is the way DI works in Angular, and you know, you guys are probably all familiar with it. If it wasn't provided here, we'd have to provide it at the global store scope. If it's not provided here, then the last place Angular goes is to the null injector. And the null injector, if anything ever asks the null injector for anything, the null injector throws the error that we see. That's how we get the error everywhere, is that Angular walks up this tree until it hits the null injector. And we can see that as soon as we fix this, right? So we can now say, hey, our hero is now our heroes store dot selected hero. Boom. And so now we were able to remove an import, which is good. And we've got a reference to our hero store, and that's fine. You know, and some people might be like, well, now you're coupling this component to the hero store. Well, this component doesn't make sense without a hero, right? It doesn't make sense without a selected hero. And so we could make the same argument that by adding a hero input, we're coupling it, right? There's, I don't know. It's semantics and it's preferences, and people like different things for different reasons. I tend to prefer this way because I am acknowledging that this component only makes sense in the context of the heroes view model. And it only makes sense in the context where we have a hero. And so, you know, if we need to reuse this component, that's the case when we can revisit and decide what we want to do. The next thing we do is we're going to break this two-way binding. Well, actually, we can take a look, right? So you can't bind to selected hero since it is an unknown property of TOH here. Oh, we need to fix that. So in our heroes view model, or in our app component, nope. In our heroes view, here, this no longer makes sense because we're relying on the DI to get this. And the reason that the hero store works is that we've got our providers here, right? So there we go. And now we're properly bound. Notice that our hero update hero name, we didn't have the input anymore. this code is actually going to move down for us. So it's good that that's there. What we can do is we can say, hey, here our value. Well, before we do that, let's see what we get still, right? So now we've got our hero. We can now type test, and we're still getting the issue, right? It's still telling us, hey, name is read only. You know, if I come in and I select Windstorm and I test it, name is still read only, and that's what we want. We don't want this binding to be we don't want the mutations to be causing changes anywhere else. What we want to have happen, and this is why I talk about like unidirectional flow. So what we want is we want our store to inform changes in our UI, and our UI to capture events, right? So these are our events. Well, maybe I should name this differently, right? This is, we'll call this user interaction, right? So our user will interact here, which will inform our store. And so we wind up with this unidirectional flow where the UI, all it's there for is to react to changes in the state and then capture user interactions, and those user interactions then inform new changes in the state. So we get this unidirectional flow, and we can reason about things better. We know that the only way that let's get rid of this, right? We know that the only way that this or this will change is if the state changes, right? These only change if the state changes. And that's why we want the immutable flow to be there, because now we know that if Windstorm changes, we can look in the store, because the store is the only way to mutate that change, right? I can't cause a side effect anymore, so I'm not having to dig through a ton of code. And that's the benefit of the immutable code. And man, I've got to end here in about 3 minutes, but that's okay. We'll get this fixed. So the first thing we want to do is, instead of this, we're going to bind value here. By binding value, we're going to see that now when we select the hero, those update appropriately. And when we change this, right, we've broken that mutation because we don't have the two-way binding anymore. The other thing we can do is, because we're no longer using the forms module, we can get rid of the forms module here. And so the next thing we can do is we can just say, hey, when this changes, right, we can say that we want to update hero name with the event. Perfect. And then we don't have update hero name, but guess what? We do have it here. So there we go. We'll grab that and we will move it over. So there's our updated hero name. And because we've got this, did we put that in the library? We didn't. We're going to have to grab the get prop value. We're going to need to move that into something else. But for right now, we're probably going to move this into a library because we'll be using it more. Right? But now we've got our get prop value. And so now we can console log our value when it changes, right? And what is going on there? Caught promise 8. HMR2 is undefined. Do I have something going on? Let's just reload this. Oh, there's my alarm telling me, hey, you need to end. This is good for another video cut. Hey, Ola, if you wanna send me timestamps on the pieces that you think would be good video cuts, I'll make those. Right. So Windstorm now we've broken it, right? And we can see test is changing test 1, and it's only updating on the change value, right? Because we have it on the change. I do need to end now. We'll talk about this in the future. The better thing to do is to have it change when the input changes. And well, we can do that really quick, right? Instead of on the change value, we can change it to the input value. And now, if we change here and go to test, we can see that we're getting that, right? So the last thing we can do, just to make this work, is instead of console logging it, which isn't helpful, we can now say, hey, this .hero store .update hero name value. Do we not have an update hero name? Hero store. Okay, so we don't have that anymore. So we'll add the function. So we need to update hero name. Update hero name. And we need a hero, which is a hero, and a name, which is a string. And that will allow us to call the function down below. Oh, we don't actually need, we do need that. Oh, we only had one hero. That's the problem. So what we have to do is we have to patch state, and here what we want is we want to update our heroes. Oh, we're gonna have to do more than this. Because we need to update a specific hero. So we're gonna need to write some code to do that. So for right now, I'm gonna have to end here. We'll come back next time at this point and talk about how we want to handle the updating of the hero name. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to update this function to actually do it. So we'll do that. But for right now, we can pass in also our hero heroes store dot selected hero. Well, we don't even need that because we've got the selected hero. We'll figure this out later. I definitely need to end. It's always tough for me to end in the middle. But you guys have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next time. Next week we'll be back. I'm still working on getting a good streaming schedule during the week. And so I'll figure that out. There's some weird complexity with trains and all this other stuff that I'm still trying to figure out, and figure out what I want to do. So, but we'll definitely be back next week. I don't have anything going on, and we'll finish this up.